What is up, guys, and welcome to another video here on KFI Virey Ham Radio. As you guys might have seen in my last video, I recently went out and successfully completed my first POTA activation, and today I just want to talk about some of the things I learned from my first POTA activation. As I said earlier, I recently went out and completed my first POTA activation, and I did so at Fort Parker State Park, Park Kilo 3010 in Mexia, Texas. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours south of me, and I went with my good friend Jereme, K5TXY. He drove up from Houston, met me halfway, and yeah, it was both of our first time activating POTA. We just both had a great time, and we both definitely caught the POTA bug, so we're both looking forward to our next POTA activation, and we're already planning it and trying to figure out what we're going to do that. And I learned a lot of things about operating portable that I could do better, or that just would make my life a lot easier. And like I said, I'm going to talk about some of those today. So I think one of the biggest things that I learned from this activation was just planning and preparing. I think planning and preparing ahead of time is definitely something that is a huge help, since that's not really something that I did in this case. It was kind of just a last minute decision that, hey, we're gonna go try to book a camping site at this park down in Mexia and try to activate it and get our first POTA activation under our belt. So there's just some things there, kind of planning it out last minute, that definitely made it a little bit harder. So I think planning and preparing ahead of time is going to be a huge help for me in the future. And by planning ahead of time, I mean more so reserving your camping site and your entry for the park, just to make sure that you can get there before the park is either full, or make sure that the camping sites are not already full. In addition to the stuff for the park, also planning and preparing your gear ahead of time, planning what you're going to take, what radio you're going to take, what antennas you're going to take, how much coax you might need, just all those different things, preparing all that, charging up any batteries that you have. In my case, I took my PowerWorks PowerBox 10. I did not end up using it, actually. We ended up using power that was provided by the park at the campsite that we were staying in. Like I said, that's just part of the planning. Is there power there? If not, what all do I need to bring? If there's power, what kind of power cords do I need to bring? What power supplies, etc. Just check all that ahead of time. Make sure that all your stuff is ready to go. Put in bags, put in boxes, however you're going to transport your gear. My stuff was all just, my shack was just totally strung out and all over the place. I had to just gather up all my gear and make sure I didn't leave anything, and then go load it in the car. And it really did take, it probably took about an hour to get out of the house after me and Jereme decided that we were going to go do this activation. So just making sure that you prepare ahead of time and your gear's prepped and all that is going to be a big help. That will in the end alleviate a lot of stress. Another thing to plan ahead and consider is your activation going to span over multiple UTC dates and times? You could get to a park and just start transmitting without even thinking about this. But so the way that POTA works, to get credit for your activation, you actually have to make at least 10 contacts for each UTC day that you're operating. So if you get to your park and get set up and just start transmitting at, say, 2350 hours, and you don't make 10 contacts before 00 UTC the next day, then you don't get credit for that activation. So again, you have to make at least 10 contacts within that first UTC day and the second UTC day, or you just need to just wait until the UTC day starts over again and just make all your contacts within that day. So that's just another thing to consider in order to get credit for your activation. And another thing that I learned to consider is let other hams know that you're going to be out there so they can spot you. And you can actually go onto the POTA website and spot yourself ahead of time. There's a little form that you fill out that's, I'm going to have an activation later today or tomorrow or whatever. You can just fill it out ahead of time, and that'll put you on the watch list on POTA website, just so that you were spotted and people know, hey, this person is activating and they might want to be at work. Doing that ahead of time, and then just letting other hams know that, hey, I'm going to be out activating this park. Be looking for me so they can spot you, and you'll keep getting spotted on the POTA website, and people will be able to continue to find you and hunt you. And just one more last thing on the planning is just plan to travel lighter. You never know if you're actually going to have to go hike or something like that to get to an activation spot. I mean, most of the time you can plan ahead, especially if you're camping, and say, oh yeah, I'm just going to camp here at this campsite and we're just going to try to activate from this campsite, which is how me and Jereme did it. Just traveling lighter, not taking as much stuff, I think for me, that's going to be a bigger help. Some people like to just bring all their stuff, and that's fine. You can travel however you want, bring as much gear as you want. But I think for me, trying to fit everything in one backpack for me is just going to be a lot easier. And in the end, it keeps things from getting lost and things like that during your activation and not forgotten behind. And one of the other things that I learned some things from was operating during the activation. So I think one of the biggest things that I learned while activating is that phone modes are just so much more fun than digital modes actually during a POTA activation. I made a ton of contacts on FT8 at the beginning of the activation, and then we switched over to phone. And honestly, I gotta say, when we switched over to sideband phone, I just had so much more fun. It's just fun to be able to actually talk to people on the radio and actually, you know, kind of get the personality and things like that. It's just a lot more fun, I think. So don't shy away from that, and try not to let the mic fright keep you from getting on sideband phone. And to each their own. Some people want to go out there and FT8's their only mode of operation, and that's totally fine. I'm not knocking that at all. Like I said, I did FT8. I made a ton of contacts on my activation, and some people want to go out there and just use only sideband phone, and that's totally fine. Or whatever other modes, CW, whatever other modes they want to operate in. For me personally, just my advice is kind of mix it up a little bit. FT8 was a ton of fun too. I think sideband phone for me was just the most fun part of my activation, and I would just highly recommend everybody try it out. And another thing that I learned was don't be afraid to move around the bands. If you do move around the bands, just make sure that you try to respot yourself, just so people know, hey, I'm moving over to this band from this band, and they'll be able to hunt you and all that kind of stuff, and they'll see that somebody's operating there, or they don't think that maybe you already went QRT or whatever. But don't tie yourself to just one band. I see a lot of people that go out and only operate on 20 meters, which is totally fine. I mean, I made a majority of my contacts on 20 meters, but really just kind of go out and explore the bands and just have fun with it. You can move around as much as you want to. You'll still get credit for it. Just, you know, like I said, just make sure you spot yourself so that other people know that you're moving around on the bands and all that. One more thing that I learned when I'm operating too is if you're having a hard time making contacts, say you're higher in the bands on 10 meters or you're operating on like 20 meters and things like that, move closer to like the technician portion of the 10-meter band or something like that if you can. If the propagation's right on 10 meters, there might be a bunch of technicians out there that are hunting on the technician portions of the 10-meter band. So that's just one more thing that I wanted to say there. And I'm sure some of those technicians out there will be very grateful that you move down to their portion of the band so that they can get in there and hunt you as well. And it just makes it more fun for all of us. So one thing that I noticed I was doing out there, and I kind of was trying to work on it too, was slow down when I'm talking on the radio. And I think some of that's due to just some mic shyness, because I don't really do a whole lot of phone operation, especially on sideband. I was giving my call sign and it was hard to hear. I was just saying my call sign like really fast. And so just one piece of advice that I'll say, especially if you're a new ham, slow down when you're giving your call sign. It's not a race to get your call sign out there. Just be sure that you're saying it slow and clearly enough where the other person who's hunting you, or that you were, you know, maybe making a park-to-park contact with, can actually understand your call sign. Just try to relax and just work slower. You'll be able to process what people are saying and things like that on the radio, and hopefully it'll just make you a little bit more relaxed and just less shy on the radio. And in the end, really, it's just all about having fun and going out there and enjoying the nature, and just relax and try not to be shy on the radio and just enjoy the activation. So one other thing that I noticed during my activation was I was getting really preoccupied with logging, and to the point I was kind of like just falling behind, and Jereme was having to like tell me people's call signs and things like that, signal reports, and I was just like really worried about going through and making sure that all my details were filled in my log. So what I'll say is just don't worry about filling in where somebody's QTH and all that is, and you can always come back after you've exchanged QSO details, you know, got their call sign and their signal report and all that, or their park number if it's park-to-park contact. But just make sure to just try to focus on getting just the basics. Again, call sign, maybe their name, signal reports, and again, if it's a park-to-park, park number, and maybe even a grid square. But like I said, just focus on the basic details and try to come back and fill the rest in later. And one last thing that I learned about operating during the POTA activation is I really need to log in a software that's a little bit less complex than rumlog-ng. Don't get me wrong, I love rumlog-ng. It's my favorite logging software. By far one of the best logging softwares on Mac, if not the best. but it's really complex during a POTA activation, and there's just a ton of stuff you have to try to find. So one thing I'll recommend is, and I'm going to try this on my next activation, using a simpler program to log like hammers. It's got POTA templates, so basically you put all your QSO details in when you're logging, and you can log right there. It's really simple, everything's big, easy to read and all that, and when you put all that data in there, it will just be basically ready to send to POTA as is. And if you're doing FT8 stuff like that, you're going to have to manually log the FT8. And I didn't realize that the ADA files from rumlog and G were different than what POTA wants. I ended up logging all my sideband phone contacts in rumlog because I didn't know that the ADA file that it spits out is different than the one POTA wants. So I ended up having to go back and go through my entire log and relog everything in hammers with the POTA template, and just come back and put all that in there and then just re-export it. And I was just able to go upload that to POTA and send it off to POTA to get my credit for the activation. So like I said, simpler program like Hammer or something like that, and it'll just make your life a lot easier when it comes to logging. And here's just some other things that I learned from my activation. So as I mentioned earlier, we had power at our campsite at this park, and I did take the Power Box Mini out there with me, but I did not end up using it to power the radio. I was powering everything off my power supply that I took from my QTH out there, and I was using terminal rings on there, so I had to unscrew the terminals and put the terminal rings on there, screw them back on. It just took a lot of time to mess with. So when I got home, I actually cut the wires on it and just terminated Anderson power poles on both my radio and my power supply. And I'd already actually done the power pole conversion to the FT891 and had another cable made for power poles. But yeah, I ended up doing all that on the Power Box Mini, and it's worked great so far at home. So yeah, that's just one thing that I will recommend doing. Anderson power poles on any of your electronics that you plan to run. It'll be so much easier than taking terminal rings off or trying to wrap your wire around the terminal, however you do it at home, especially if you're taking your power supply portable like I did, or if you're gonna do an extended trip and you got camping power or whatever, and you got 120 power at a campsite or whatever. And Anderson power poles really do just save the day and just make power management so much simpler. So one other thing that I'll recommend is bring a set of headphones with you. And this is especially if you're doing a camping trip like I did. So our camping sites were really right up next to each other. We had a neighbor that was maybe 100 yards away from us, and Jeremy actually said when he walked away from the campsite to go do something, he was coming back, he could hear my FT8 coming out and some of our sideband phone stuff from wherever he walked off to. That was actually kind of a distance away, so just be aware that that noise does carry, and so bring headphones. Just be courteous to other people at the park. Sometimes you're not the only one in the park, so just bring headphones just in case, and just be courteous to others around you. And especially if you're like us and we were operating at like 2 a.m. and yeah, so just try to bring a set of headphones just to quiet things down a little bit and make sure that you're not disturbing your neighbors. So another thing that I learned, and I did actually do this, but I just thought I would mention this, make sure you bring extra coax and extra power cables. You never know when a coax might just not want to work. Maybe you just got a bad cable, or a power cable starts having a short or whatever. You just want to make sure it doesn't run your activation to have a dead cable and you don't have a spare. So like I said, bring extra coax, especially jumpers, things like that if you're going to a tuner and all that stuff. If you lose cable, whatever, you got extras, power cables. If you got a short, you can just replace it and go on about your day and enjoy your activation. Also, one thing that I think most people probably do already know this, but bring some kind of support system in terms of antenna support. I personally am just using PVC, sitting it on top of a light stand, but make sure you bring some kind of support stand for that, or whatever to, you know, maybe you have a MFJ big stick that you're hooking up, you're stabbing it in the ground with a tent stake or whatever and holding that up, but just make sure you bring something to hold up your antennas and all that. And if you're using something like a tripod, just make sure you bring something like sandbags and things like that to, you know, just be able to keep it from falling over in the wind and things like that if the wind were to pick up. So one other thing that I did not actually bring that I need to go buy from Harbor Freight is tent stakes. Tent stakes really will save the day. Thankfully, Jeremy had a couple of those, and if Jeremy wasn't there, I probably wouldn't have been able to even complete this activation. But tent stakes are a big help. You can use tent stakes to do things like tie down your radials, you know, tie down legs of a dipole, whatever. So just bring tent stakes. And in addition to tent stakes, I would also say bring some paracord or rope or some kind of string, something like that. You can tie to the ends of your radials and tie those down so that, you know, they're out flat, or you can tie them to trees to make sure that your radials just kind of get up there, or anything else that you might need paracord or tent stakes for. Like I said, dipole legs, hanging antennas in trees, in addition to the paracord too. If you're using something that you're going to try to mount a wire antenna in a tree, slingshot, so some way to get it up into the tree to deploy the antenna. I think lastly, just to kind of wrap it up, don't be afraid to bring whatever radio you have out there. Be mindful that it could get wet, it starts raining, or if it gets humid, that it could get moisture, could possibly damage it. But, you know, be smart in your operation and, you know, check the weather ahead of time before you go do a POTA activation. Just bring whatever radio you have. If you don't have an HF rig, even if it's like a 2 meter 440 FM transceiver, 5-watt Baofeng, whatever, just bring it with you and just have fun with it. Just take it out, get on the air, have fun, make some contacts, and try to activate. Try to get 10 contacts and just have at it. You know, take your Baofeng out there and just see what you can get on 2 meter call, 70 centimeter call, because you'd be surprised what you can get out there. Just take whatever radio you got, take it out, experiment with it, and just have fun and get on the air, because really that's all it's about. That's it for this video. That's all I got for you guys. That's just some of the things that I kind of thought about that were important to remember with a POTA activation, and just some of the things that I could have done, that I could have brought or done better, whatever. That's just some of the things that I learned from my first POTA activation. It's just about getting outdoors and, you know, enjoying nature, enjoying our parks that we have, and getting on the air and just having fun with it. Bring what you got, antennas, radios, whatever you got. Get out there, have fun, get on the air. That's all I got for you guys today. See you guys later. 73.